So we are on a transformative journey this year, and what I wanted to do for the first couple of months was do a review of our origins, of our unity origins, of our own stories, of how we awaken spiritually, and looking at our principles and reviewing where we've been. And I wanted to focus on a couple of unity principles today, and that's the first two. And the first one is, of course, there is but one presence and one power in the universe, God the good, omnipotence. We know that God is good and the underlying principle of all. And my guess is that you wouldn't be in unity if you hadn't already come to this conclusion on your own, right? I mean, there was something that happened in your life, whether it was when you were a child or recently, where you began to see that good is the underlying principle, that there is a blessing in everything. I know that for me, I noticed it from the time I was, probably as a teenager, because I grew up in a neighborhood that was a little bit rough, and I babysat some of the kids, and when they grew up, they would do things that were not good. They would do bad things, But what I knew was that that person wasn't bad. They might have done something that was not good, but they didn't mean their character was, or their core was any less good. So I formed that view at a very young age and have continued to hold that, which is why unity has been a fit for me since 1981. God is omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. So God is all-powerful, God is all-knowing, God is everywhere present. There is nowhere we can be where God is not. And in Psalm 139, we read, "O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high that I cannot attain it. So where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there." So we hear from this beautiful psalm that this omnipresence, omniscience, and omnipotence of God, that the Spirit is everywhere present. And so holding to that theology, that belief that God is good, that God is everywhere present, and there is nowhere we can be where God is not. I'd like you to just hold that as we move forward. And our second principle, of course, is that thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. Now, in our own lives, we know that it is the predominant thought and emotion that manifests, that not every fleeting thought of yours manifests, does it? I mean, imagine the trouble you'd be in if every thought you had. And I believe that that's why we have chosen to be born. That's why we're in physical bodies. That's why we're living in this dimension of time and this dimension of reality and physical form, is because when we do have a thought, it has to manifest itself in time. It has to manifest itself in the world. So we have a chance to learn from it. It's not this instantaneous thing that it might be if we didn't have physical bodies. And we tend to surround ourselves with people who think like us, who look like us, who agree with us. And so the truth is, if you want to know a little bit about yourself, what do you need to do? Look at your friends, right? Look who you hang out with. Look at your family. I did a memorial service yesterday for a woman named Dorothy Kaloper, who was 90 years old, and she passed away a week ago. And Dorothy had been a part of this church for a very long time, not recently, but most of her adult life. And she said, "Unity awakened me from sleepwalking and put me on the path of self-enlightenment. when she was young, she was very sick. And what's interesting to me is that her story sounds a lot like Myrtle Fillmore's, the co-founder of Unity. Because Dorothy was very sick as a child, and when she was young, and she just kind of was told by the doctors that, this is just the way it's going to be. This is the way it's going to be. And she decided that that's not the way it was going to be, and Unity helped her to see that. So she took control of her health. She took control of her life. And what I noticed about her is that she so took on the teachings of Unity, the omnipresence, omnipotence, and omniscience, that God is good, that thoughts create our reality, that her whole entire life was transformed by it. And that's great, but what's even more amazing is I met with her grown children and her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren, and I could see that spirit and that belief in every single one of them. And when I said, so what is it about your grandma, your mom, that, was most pertinent for you? What's the word that described her? And they said, she empowered us. And she was a cheerleader for our lives. And she told us that we could do anything in this world, and we believed her. And I could see it manifested. There were a couple hundred people here yesterday, and it was palatable in the room. Thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. She affected not just her family, but everyone that she touched. Now, some of us may not have been lucky enough to be raised by someone who empowered and believed in us. Some of us were, some of us weren't. And in other cases, you may have had to overcome a thought atmosphere that was maybe toxic or negative. Anybody have to raise with that? And how many were raised with being empowered and believed in? So there's a mix. And sometimes we have a combination, don't we? So again, the law of mind action states that what you focus on grows, that what you appreciate appreciates. And Swami Shivananda said this, although I've also heard this reported to have been said by other teachers, but I first heard it from Swami Shivananda. And he said, sow a thought. And he didn't say reap a word, but I think it's got to be sow a thought, reap a word, right? Reap a word, sow an action, reap a habit, sow a habit, reap a destiny. So there's this movement of energy that begins with a thought. And again, you wouldn't be here if you didn't already understand this premise. The law of karma will give back to us what we are putting in the world. In Proverbs 18:7, it says, a fool's mouth is his ruin, and his lips are a snare to his soul. So it works both ways, right? It works both ways. We reap what we sow, and we create our destiny. When I lived in Missouri a long time ago, when I was in ministerial school, I lived in an apartment building my first year. The second year I got to live at Unity Village, but the first year I lived in this apartment building, and one of my neighbors, he wasn't a very nice person. And one of the phrases that he would say a lot is, it's a dog-eat-dog world. What do you expect? It's a dog-eat-dog world. And this is so interesting, and it kind of shows how sometimes our words can manifest. He was in his car and driving down some back road, and his car stalled, and he's stuck. And all of a sudden, a pack of wild dogs came out of nowhere, and they were barking at him. And he came back and told the story, and I was like, it really is a dog-eat-dog world. Wow. So the truth is, we're free to create our world. It can be like Dorothy Kaloper, who, manifested this wonderful life and lived way beyond the years that it was said she was going to live, or it could be like my neighbor. We can use our words to heal and lift up to higher ground, or we can use our words to create a toxic environment. So, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, I want to point out that the words that we are hearing publicly now, I think are alarming, because some of the words we're hearing is the world is a mess, the world is as angry as it gets, the world's an angry place, the world is a disaster. And it feels to me like when those words are spoken on a grand scale, that they have an effect, right? Is anybody feeling the effect of those? And we know that there's some truth in this, of course there is. But there is also a lot of good, a lot of kindness, a lot of beauty, and a lot of brilliance in this world, right? But by having our leaders speak these words, I believe it contaminates what Teilhard de Chardin would call the noosphere, right? The noosphere is this like thought envelope that encircles the earth. And Teilhard de Chardin believed that the noosphere, that we would all evolve and awaken and we would pop, to a whole other level, right? I think Charles Fillmore referred to it as race consciousness. Jung called it the collective unconscious. But the result that I'm seeing by a large number of people is that they're experiencing anxiety, depression, insomnia. Anybody here? So we're called to a higher ground, and that's where I want to go with this, right? So let's take it down to a personal level. So what do you do when you live or work in a toxic environment? What have you done in your life when you have found yourself in that place? Probably you're going to say, I leave, that's like probably number one. But what happens when you can't leave? When you can't leave, what can you do? And that is, I think each of us are called to effect a change. So when I first learned about the law of mind action, I was in my 20s, and this was all new to me. I'd never heard of any of this before. And I was working at a law firm, and it was kind of a toxic environment because there was a lot of, one-upmanship, and there was a lot of gossip and backbiting that would go on. And so I thought I had this, how when you find out something new and you're like, yes, I'm going to just turn on the whole world with it. So I went and told some of the other women who worked there, I said, our thoughts create our reality and our words have power and effect. And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah. I go, let's have lunch and let's just practice, right? Positive words and stuff. And if anybody says anything, negative, we'll say cancel, right? Because we don't want to put that out there. So we went out to lunch. There were about 4 or 5 of us. And we spent almost the entire lunch in silence. Because we did not know how to talk without gossiping, putting somebody down or complaining about this and that. And so every time someone would start to talk, we'd say, hey, you know what I heard about? Cancel. And so, but it was a slow movement and a slow change. So that when you first make these moves, you might feel like you're just throwing a stone in a pond, right? And it may have a little bit of a ripple effect, but it begins to grow. And now I can't imagine really speaking any other way. Not that I don't complain. Believe me, I complain, and I'm all for sharing your feelings and being real about where you are. But I also get the power of the spoken word. So most of us understand this is Law of Mind Action 101. So when you find yourself in a toxic environment, how do you keep from getting affected by it or crushed by it or controlled by it? And in particular in this world, how do you stay awake and aware and not give in to despair? Well, going back to our Unity teachings, Emily Cady, who is one of our founders, or one of our founder writers, said this, and it is in your bulletin. She said, I am spirit, perfect, holy, harmonious. Nothing can hurt me or make me sick or afraid, for spirit is God, and God cannot be sick or hurt or afraid. There is nothing in all the universe for me to fear, for the Christ that I am is greater than that which is in the world. Those are very powerful words. They were written in, I believe, the late 1800s. And if you would, I would like for us to affirm this together. So if you would grab your bulletin, and if you have to share it, And I would like us to stand up because these are very powerful words, and I would like for us to speak them from a place of empowerment. Together. I am spirit, perfect, holy, harmonious. Nothing can hurt me or make me sick or afraid, for spirit is God, and God cannot be sick or hurt or afraid. There is nothing in all the universe for me to fear, for the Christ that I am is greater than that which is of the world. And breathe it in. And one more time for good measure. I am spirit, perfect, holy, harmonious. Nothing can hurt me or make me sick or afraid, for spirit is God, and God cannot be sick or hurt or afraid. There is nothing in all the universe for me to fear, for the Christ that I am is greater than that which is of the world. Do you believe it? Yes. All right. Do you believe that the Spirit is stronger in you and more powerful than that which is playing out in the world right now? Yes. All right. You may be seated. So there may be a world that is dangerous and horrible and a disaster, but the world is also kind and great and filled with wonder and possibility and brilliance. And you are that pebble and maybe a big rock, maybe a boulder that gets thrown into the pond to start changing the noosphere. I think it's imperative that we all go to a higher ground. And what's interesting is for the past, 100 years, at least the last 50 or 60 years, we've had access to the wisdom from so many different spiritual traditions. I mean, here's Siddha, our Sikh, yeah? It brings us Kundalini yoga and brings us the wisdom from that place, you know. Lobo just was playing the Native American drum. So we have the wisdom of Native Americans, of Hinduism, of yoga, of the Bible, of unity. And it's like, okay, so we have these tools. We just now need to pull them out and begin to use them. I don't think it's any accident that we have had this training, if you will. So now is not the time to drop your spiritual practice. Whatever that is for you, you need your spiritual practice to be a warrior. Last Thursday night, the Emoja group went to see I Am Not Your Negro at the Egyptian Theater. It's about James Baldwin, and it drew many correlations between the 60s, the civil rights movement, and current times. And of course, we were witnessing many injustices and much violence, and then there were scenes not only from the past, but from the present. And the feeling afterward was, have things actually changed very much? It doesn't actually look like it. And I think this is the time when we're confronted with something like this that we have to ask ourselves, okay, so how do I move to a higher ground? How do I look at this and go, okay, I see what's going on, and then I have to lift it up and I have to move it to a higher ground. Paul said in Quotations, he said, set your minds on things that are above and not on things that are of the earth. Because what we know about the earth is it's transitory, that this too shall pass. And so we need to find a way to lift ourselves from the present condition and see it from a higher perspective. I see time and history as a thread. And I think that we're here really for a very short time, right? I mean, it feels like we're here for a long time, but really it's just kind of a blip. And so we get a short view of history. We get a short view of events. And it seems to me that time and history are a thread, and it feels like it's dropped sometimes. So there's like this great movement forward. And then it's like, okay, we sort of let that go. We either got it or we forgot about it. And then it comes back again. And it appears as if we never really got it in the first place. But what I think is happening is that the thread is being picked up again, and we're here at a different level, and now we can carry it one step further. And that's our place in history right now, is we have, we are revisited with so many events, and it's like, okay, so it's here again. This thread is picked up again. Now, what is mine to do to carry it to the next level? This, when I look at it from that perspective, puts me in a higher ground. What is that for you? That's what helps me, is that, okay, we need to be looking at the patterns, and we need to be looking at how we move forward. But what is that specifically for you? I'd like you to think about that. Because now is our time to pick up the thread of events in history and carry them further. We can create a world that blesses many, as Dorothy Kaloper did, or we can believe that it's a dog-eat-dog horrible world. The noosphere is getting toxic, and that's why you are needed. Timothy, in the book of Timothy, chapter 2, we read, "For God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but rather a spirit of power and of love and of self-discipline." God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, gave us a spirit of power and love. So you are never alone. You can rise to the highest of heavens, and God is there. You can sink to the deepest lows, and God is there. But we call out the good, the omnipresence, omnipotence, and omniscience of spirit. The law of mind action tells us that what we focus on will grow. Your prayers, your kindness, and your thoughtful action is necessary, because you can change things, and it may be a small start, like having lunch with a bunch of people and saying, cancel, cancel, or it can be something really big. Finally, in Philippians, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Meditate on these things, and then seek action. Sow a thought, reap a word. Sow a word, reap an action. Sow an action, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, and reap a destiny. A good destiny." Thank you.